Hello and welcome to the High Tech Low Code podcast. Today we have again the company of Rebecca Garland as our co-host. How are you doing, Rebecca? How is life treating you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. On today's podcast, we're going to talk about how technology solved the problem of diversity and inclusion in recruitment. And to help us discuss this subject, we have as our guest Man Wong, who has more than a decade of experience in the recruitment business and is the co-founder of Candidate X. I would like to start this podcast by asking how are you doing? And if you could give a little introduction about yourself, so that ourselves and our listeners could get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, sure thing. Great to be here. Thanks very much for inviting me. So first of all, hello to everyone. I'm Man Wong. My pronouns are he, his, and him, and I am a proud father, husband, and the co-founder of Candidate X. Candidate X is a diversity and inclusion engagement platform specifically for the inclusion challenge, I guess, that we're facing now in the modern day workforce. Just a little bit more about myself. I've got about a decade and a half of experience working in the staffing, and more recently now in the last couple of years, building this as one of the co-founders of diversity and inclusion business. So what that really means is I've seen in firsthand how diversity and inclusion can affect an organization and impact its most important asset, which I believe is its people, and those people that work for it, and also those people that engage with it. So I'm delighted and be excited to be talking to you guys about this today.
That's great.
So I obviously, man, I've got 8 years experience in the recruitment industry, but it'd be interesting to hear from you how you think things have changed over the course of the last 10 years since you started out in recruitment, and how you think technology has changed that landscape.
Yeah, I mean, where do you start really? I think it's interesting. Recruitment is I think most people in the main know what it is, and lots of people have different ideas and visions around it. I, like many, fell into it after leaving university, and I started in recruitment just a little over the age of 22, 23 years old. I'm now 39, so it's been a while that I've been in the game, as they like to say. And recruitment's a special kind of industry, let's just say. It's a traditionally heavy workforce orientated business or industry. It's huge. It touches upon everything that you can think of, from technology, finance, secretarial, hospitality, you name it. It's right there. And it's the people element that really sort of drove me towards it. But it's also the people element that kind of has held it back, I guess, in terms of whilst other industries have been ripe for disruption, recruitment's taken a little while to sort of get there, and that's because we've often talked about as recruiters the value of our networks, the value of human relationships, the value of the sort of human engagement, and how that can affect someone's decision to take a job or create a job or leave a job and all that sort of stuff. So the landscape has changed tremendously. I took a little bit of a bow out after 10 years with the same agency. I worked for a very large, successful London business called Aston Carter that got bought out by the world's largest privately owned staffing business, Allegiance Group Services. And I went through that phase with them. I saw 2, maybe even 3 recessions with these guys, and the principles of the business have not changed in the entirety of the time. I looked at how that landscape was always dominated by heavy phone calls, lots of manager relationships, those kind of exercises. And it was interesting that technology didn't really come in there and change too much during that period until something like LinkedIn happened, right? And LinkedIn is the ultimate game changer in that world, I feel, because, well, if you think about what LinkedIn is, it's essentially an Excel spreadsheet with lots of pictures, and people self-certify and enter all their details in, and it completely nullified the recruiter's power there. We used to perform headhunting, a lot of ruses, headhunting, gathering names. I was targeted on getting names of, we did a lot of technology front office trading, so we'd be working out different ways to get names of who worked in what, developed there, who's the manager of this area, etc. LinkedIn changed all that. And I did that overnight almost. That impact was phenomenal. And as an agency, we were very slow to sort of bring that up. So that's one remarkable change. When I left the agency, I did about 18 months, almost 2 years, building a cafe in Hoxton, which is still around. It's called Friends of Ours. Please support it during COVID. But I'm not part of it anymore. I went through a divorce from one of my business partners, and he got to keep the baby, I suppose. And I came back into recruitment afterwards. And that landscape was tremendously changed. Technology had changed it all. The rise of the ATSs, the CRMs, everything had changed it all. And what was interesting, the technologies that candidates were gravitating towards had changed as well. Ideas around industry had changed. So those 10, 15 years, I've seen tremendous changes. And I think things like LinkedIn, things like Glassdoor, those kind of emerging technologies or platforms that came about that kind of just democratized it in a good way. People had access to information, could make better choices, and not solely been manipulated by an agent who said, "Oh, I've got a great relationship with this so-and-so manager, and I can get you in here first and above the pack." And I think those changes have been difficult for a lot of agencies to swallow. So yeah, great lot of change over those years.
I think people were used to kind of, when recruitment first started out, you were given a yellow pages and a phone and told, all right, go and call as many people as you possibly can. And then LinkedIn appeared. And I think the recruitment world thought, oh God, that's our jobs null and void now. We're not going to be needed anymore. But to a certain extent, I think recruitment is not an easy job, but it has made recruiters' lives a bit easier. And I think it's also made things a little bit more transparent in terms of who's connected with who knows who, that kind of thing. So it does have it has its positives and its negatives, I would say, in terms of where LinkedIn is concerned.
I totally agree. And another good way of understanding how technology changes recruitment. I mean, I got given a BlackBerry. That was the highest sophisticated technology at the time to communicate with someone, right? There's little boldy letters and whatnot. But I mean, with the emergence of things like smartphones, WhatsApp is a game changer, right? The ability to connect with us. Most people like to text, and seeing two blue ticks, knowing, and it drives recruiters mad. It's crazy, oh my God, they've read my message and never got back to me. What's going on here? That kind of thing. And we didn't have any of that. It was a different world when I first started.
It's funny because completely outside of recruitment, obviously on my side, but the other day I was reading from somewhere else, and so this company in Canada, they don't even look at LinkedIn. They use Twitter, which I thought it was surprising, using a social media network to hire and recruit people for their company. And it was really open about it, going, oh, no, last time I updated my LinkedIn was like 8 years ago. And it was something rubbish just to try and get into XYZ. Now it's Twitter all the way. It's like, oh, fine. It's quite interesting using a different platform for recruitment. But going for one of the more interesting topics in recruitment. So speaking of diversity and inclusion, how has it changed over the years now that technology also influences this?
Well, I think one of my first conversations that I can recall about diversity and inclusion was with a top tier investment bank, and I got invited in. We were a key supplier of those guys, and we came in to talk about and what diversity and inclusion really meant back then was specifically the gender conversation. How do we get more women into technology, women into finance, women into banking, which is still a conversation today. But that was the extent of it. Groups such as these acronyms like BAME and LGBTQ and etc. weren't really readily used, I suppose. It wasn't at the forefront like it is at the tip of everybody's tongue today. There's very few people, I'd say, that work in this world that doesn't really know what those acronyms sort of stand for. I think there's a lot of debate as to whether the suitability of those acronyms, but that's another conversation in its entirety. But I think diversity inclusion has changed a lot because the idea of when McKinsey brought out its report kind of 2, 3, 4 years ago now, that first emergence of that report where they actually tabled out the commercial reasons why you should have a diverse workforce. I think that promoted everything right onto the forefront of most people's discussion. And then the subsequent movements such as Me Too and obviously the tragic death of George Floyd, with the uprising of Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter has been around for 4 years, but it's only in its prominence has gained a lot of traction because of that. Those catalytic events have meant that it's on the tip of everybody's tongue. And it's just timing, isn't it? I mean, COVID meant that everybody was at home, always checking the news, trying to understand what was going on about our world. And so it meant that everybody had the eyes at the same time on that event, which means that we can't get away from this conversation. So, and it's a good place to be. The social justice conversation, equality conversation should definitely be at the forefront in decision making of business leaders or anybody that's building a business. But that wasn't always the case, Mario. You know, when I first started in recruitment, it wasn't about that at all. You know, we'd have relationships, and managers knew that this team was a drinking team, or this team loves sports, or this team was this, and we'd find that exact carbon copy individual. So that's when, you know, you talk about technology, how they looked at this. I mean, Amazon's got a famous case where they developed the AI, right? And they based it on all their previous hires as to who they should hire next. And guess what? They were carbon copies of everybody else they'd already hired. So they weren't getting diversity.
Clone of a clone, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And hey, recruiters is exactly the same way. You know, there's all this, there is a bias and there's prejudice or stereotype about recruiters all coming from Essex or you know, or Kent, you know, these wide boys on the phone. And that's what agencies hired, you know,
okay.
I'm honest enough to kind of say that. And we recognize that's not a fair reflection of society. You know, I purposely told you my pronouns. I'm Chinese, second generation Chinese, you know, with a daughter and a son. I'm married to a Mauritian. My wife's Mauritian. You know, they're what, Charishan, I guess you call them. We live in a beautifully diverse world, and we have to understand and recognize that and understand the values of these things. So it's good that the conversation has become amplified. It'll be interesting to sort of see what will manifest off the back of that, because what I tend to seeing at the moment, sadly, well, not sadly, but I understand why people are moving towards, it almost feels like proactive discrimination. You know, having worked on the agency side, I've seen offers being pulled for people that are male, that are very capable of doing the job after 6-7 rounds because they're not women. They need to hire women in quotas now. And because of Black Lives Matter, there's been all sorts of initiatives, and rightly so, to provide opportunity for underrepresentation and ethnic minorities. However, it shouldn't be a zero-sum game, and it should not be to the detriment of equality and ability. And it should not be, you know, just as I don't want to get a job, just so I don't want to be refused for a job because I'm Chinese and male, I shouldn't automatically get a job because I'm Chinese and male, if you see what I mean. So the conversation is still ongoing, and it's the more people that get involved and put their opinions on these things, the better, I feel. And then we can have a more refined, democratized solution as to what this challenge really is.
Trying to strike that balance, right?
Absolutely. Just like everything, right? You know.
Yeah, yeah, good point. Life is about balance. Good point. Trying to pull this more to the technology side. Do you reckon that technology has helped this conversation in any way?
I do and I don't. You know, I think when it comes to something as emotive and as emotionally challenged and charged as diversity and inclusion, you know, particularly when it's heightened under this context with movements as powerful and, you know, what the Black Lives Matter conversation is about a systematic historical piece here that many of us are unable or unwilling or haven't even entertained the fact to discover and understand it. So there's a lot of change in the psyche in order to get to that page. Where technology can be helpful is obviously changing sort of processes in a very wholesale fashion, which can be good. But the problem is, what we don't want to enable this is where people look at technology as the silver bullet and they can outsource the issue. Right. You can't outsource the problem that you need to look and internalize first. And you have to have the willingness to do so. So I think technology can be great, but it's like anything, right? Like as we talked about balance, you know, there's a danger also around this. And the biggest issue with diversity inclusion really is data, you know, is understanding culture. What does your cultural makeup look like internally? And what does your cultural engagement makeup look like when you're externalizing your reaches to channels of, I want to hire for this team in Berlin or this team in London, etc. For this job, for this much money, doing this role. Okay, great. And ideally, we feel that we want to engage with more underrepresentation. Excellent. But it can't just be a case of, right, quota based. We won't hire until we get this shortlist made up of this many women, this many people from this community, etc. You have to understand with data what it is about people who look at your roles and are interested in what their diversity makeup is. And because it's data led, there's an issue because technology has been it's been abusive with data, right? You know, if you've had the time to watch the things like Social Dilemma, and obviously you guys will have researched things like Cambridge Analytica and understand that topography, there is, and rightly so, a very big mistrust of data and the use of data and how we capture it and what we're doing with these things. So it presents a conundrum. You know, it is the key to things, but the first and foremost, because it's so emotive and emotionally charged, we have to earn trust and understand how do we take that trust and do something good with it. Diversity inclusion technology businesses, be people analytics or diversity focused initiatives with technology, has to have the human element at the heart of it. right? We're not building a shopping app, where we can just like choose things and drop it into a basket and see what happens. We're talking about people and their jobs and their life and careers, and how I see, there's often discussions around millennials and transferring to this Gen Z culture. It's a prominent conversation because it's true. They care about what happens in this world, and when you have that care, technology can take it so much, but it needs to be all this other element to it as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Basically, it's like you said, technology is supposed to be the tool, not the silver bullet, like you mentioned, to kill the werewolf.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure you have a story to tell us. Do you have any interesting story, a personal example where diversity hasn't been considered something from your long decade of experience?
Oh, wow. Yeah, okay. I'm just trying to think of what I can say then without incriminating me or give me a lawsuit, I guess, or being sued for
Company
slander.
X, employees 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, sure. Look, yeah, okay. This is a good segue as to why I'm doing what I'm doing, right? I talked about my children. It's because the hope and the vision of when they come to find work, they won't experience some of the things I've seen. Being Chinese, okay, let me take a step back. You have these things called stereotype threats, I always believe, right? And there are positive stereotype threats and there are negative stereotype threats. Being Chinese, I have a lot of positive stereotype threats. And the fact that I wear glasses, automatically people just look at me and go, right, you must be very good at maths. And it's so not true, But that's the reality of life, and that's how people engage with it. My name is Man Wong. The first time someone met, I remember a friend of mine, he was trying to introduce me to someone he had on the ground in Stockholm when I was going over there with some friends as a trip over there. And I listened to this phone call, and he was speaking to this lady. And he's saying that I've got some friends, they're going over to Stockholm, love it if you meet them, you show them around a little bit. She was like, yeah, great, love to do that, it'd be brilliant when they're coming over, etc. And did all that, and then said, what's his name? And he goes, it's Man Wong. And she went, man, and he went, so he stopped and went, yeah, don't worry, he's Chinese, but don't worry, he's not really Chinese. I don't know what even that means, I guess, but it's inevitable, and these things happen, and and it happens a lot. And whilst I've got a reasonably good sense of humor, and I can take things with a pinch of salt, when it comes to work, it's a little bit different. I've had managers say to me, don't ever send me African name CVs. Ooh. Don't send me people with Indian names because they say yes to everything. I've had people who are in transition, who'd worked for a company before, reapplied, and had developed and built the proprietary system that was in question for their hiring, was absolutely the A-grade guru. And then when they met them face to face, having done all the technical tests and aced it, met them face to face, said no. These things happen, and they happen more than we care to either admit or really want to try and understand. And sometimes when I propose these things to people, they go, nah, these things don't happen anymore. We are in a more polarized situation, sadly, than we were, I guess, 3-4 years ago, where before McKinsey did their report, because of how politics is, people are rising these things to the surface, and people find it uncomfortable to talk about. I see it all the time. You look at Lewis Hamilton, he's the most successful Formula One driver in history, and he's a black man, and he's absolutely acceptable until he steps out of that quadrant of being a black man in the sports media to say something that he stands up and believes in. He's getting so much criticism unduly. Marcus Rashford has been held as this individual, and rightly so, right? But they're making it about his race. We first and foremost, that's what you see and that's what you feel, and not you two particularly, but generalization as in you.
No, I know, of course.
we can't. There are a lot of things that happen, sadly, when it comes to hiring or engaging with individuals, that we compartmentalize you and me into boxes, and that's the way we're built physiologically, and we understand that. And but that's why it's important to talk. When you guys asked me to come on to talk about this thing, I got really excited about doing these things because I think it's important to talk about these things, and
of course it's
happens, right?
It's an open forum. That's the whole point, right? Get interesting topics out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Was there a particular tipping point that made you decide to get away from recruitment and start looking at the diversity and inclusion technology?
Yeah. I think there's a few things, right? One is there's a better way. There is definitely a better way than what we're currently doing, and so, and there's other things where I looked at recruitment as a whole. The old agency model is very commoditized. LinkedIn, as we talked about, and there are more players. There's so competitive, and I think you're from agency, aren't you, Rebecca? You worked at Barclay Simpson beforehand, and now you're on site, etc. So and it's not like you did a few stints there. You were there for a good solid period. You've got subject matter expertise. You understand the processes. You've got a great network, and now you've gone in on site. More and more people, it was when on site was originally introduced. People used to call it, and don't take any offense, people would say, "Oh, it's failed recruiters end up on site." That's so not true. It's so not true. Great people end up on site. Very good, strong people end up on site. And that's the competition. The landscape changed completely. So there was a commercial reason, obviously. We recognized that and understood it. It's the way that clients treated the commoditization as this transactional element that I was very unhappy with. They would look at you simply as another supplier, and that's fine. I don't want special treatment. But I also found that what I was seeing, you've entrusted me to represent you and interface to the market. I'm bringing you back information and data to tell you why, for instance, you need to advertise your salary, or for instance, why your job spec needs to not be something that you rolled out from 4 years ago, or why actually this interview process needs to be shortened, or why you need to do this quicker. But my ability to influence a recruiter was that big, single digit percentages, because they will go, look, you're my supplier. That's all. As far as I'm concerned, I may as well have been selling pens to them. When I started this typical conversation, I look at what we do as so important. You're talking about human capital. Your most important assets, your people. Your business is as great as it is with the product and the idea and the vision, I'm sure, but without its people, it's nothing. You don't get anything done. And I always found that paradox interesting, where clients just didn't really understand or recognize that feel. And I don't know if you share some of those sentiments as I do, Rebecca, but that's kind of the tipping point. And diversity needed an innovative tool, and that's what we've been working on. That's what drove me.
I had a colleague at my old agency who once overheard a hiring manager in a bank referring to recruiters as traders of human flesh.
Oh my gosh.
I think when I heard that, I thought to myself, "Oh my God, is that what people think of us?" I think that's the thing. I think a lot of the time they use us as a kind of introduction tool. They don't really see the benefit of having a good recruiter there, and somebody who can actually provide influence and knows what they're talking about and that kind of thing, and who can actually give them a bit of advice and guidance on the diversity and inclusion stuff. I remember that the sort of closer to the time that I left, I noticed, because I used to recruit into the larger investment banks, you used to get your kind of list of candidates back, and they'd say no because it doesn't hit the quota of male versus female. And it's like, for example, in tech roles, it's predominantly male dominated, really, when you think about it. How, it makes life very difficult. And we'll go back to your point of sometimes people are getting rejected from jobs who are perfectly capable of doing the job and may be the best in class person for the job, but they're not the right race, they're not the right gender, they're not hitting their quotas that they need.
Yeah. I mean, I saw this thread yesterday on LinkedIn about what made it so interesting was the irony of it all. Like, so they have this new agenda for 10,000 black apprenticeships, and I think that's great, to advocate underrepresentation. And the thread of comments was incredible, where people viewed it and interpreted it as a zero-sum game. And I looked at this in the same way. It's like, well, you're talking about inclusion, but initiatives like this, when it's published in such a way, can come across as anti-inclusive. Prejudice doesn't defeat prejudice is my point. And I guess the last point was what I found quite funny about it was David Cameron coming out and pushing this agenda. And I'm like, look, you had the highest office in the country, highest position in office, in the country, and you didn't make those changes back then. And the problem is now in this world where, hey, look, there's a lot of consumer, external shareholder pressure around diversity and inclusion. It's so easy for people just to be disingenuous, provide performative allyship, right? And just position themselves in this thing as a tick box exercise, just to sort of garner some praise and some trust, and when it's disingenuous. And I can't say more than that, being that person, given that he could have done something a long time ago and he just didn't. And now he's wanting to get on the bandwagon, I suppose. We're in an interesting time with this, that's for sure. Okay,
talking about Candidate X.
Sure.
How does Candidate X addresses the problem? Well, these problems that we've been talking of, diversity and inclusion and everything else.
Sure. So CX has been in kind of working mode for the last kind of couple of years. I was straddling over two jobs that I was in the agency, which is Love Work Life, and then I also was doing this kind of like side hustle, everybody likes to call it, right?
Right.
And right. And there's so much research and time spent in terms of understanding where it was, lots of conversations. And then we launched in February with this movement, this community piece. And the whole idea was anybody can be I am candidate X, for those reasons where everybody can experience prejudice and bias. Let's be honest, a white heterosexual male in the 40s at the moment is one of those vulnerable categories because of this diversity push where people want to hide the underrepresentation and overlook perhaps some of this other side instead. So we believe everybody can be I am candidate X. And all we did was in February was promote the idea of inclusion, promote the importance of diversity, and we didn't particularly align with a group. So you might get companies or organizations that just stand for LGBTQ, disability, BAME, whatever it might be. We want to feel that we represent equality, so that means everybody. So it required a lot of investment in terms of research and understanding, and then trying to get affiliated with partnerships and groups. Once we had all that information, we were trying to reach out and get sentiment. What's their experiences in the working life. So give you an example: are all recruitment processes, technology or not, on your manual basis or something online, accessible? If you've got vision impairment, or you suffer from autism, or you've got epilepsy, what happens? How do you capture that understanding and then produce a process that's in line so that these people also feel included and they can perform their best? And we needed to understand a lot of this. So post that, we got those sentiments, got a lot of stories. We started to work on a product, because the biggest comeback that we had on when we produced, if you go onto our website today, it's not even very clear what the product is, and that's by design. But people were going, what's your proposition? I'm a client or I'm a candidate, what's my proposition? And we've been working on this. And what we're taking out to market, fingers crossed, in Q1 next year is an equality first, equality-led engagement platform for diversity and inclusion. What that really means is we want to build something that's candidate at the forefront, where they can engage with organizations that are genuine and authentic. And how they can do that is through a direct channel to talk to company ambassadors. So to ask the question, what's it really like for someone like me to work there? If I'm a returning mum, back in the not in a COVID world, if I needed to leave at 3:00 on a Tuesday to pick up my kids, I need to know there's not going to be any microaggression. I need to know that people aren't going to be, like in recruitment, used to say, hey, half day, is it? All this sort of nonsense.
Yeah, right. I see.
Right. And you want to feel that assurance. And if you're a returning mother, don't forget emotionally, and you might be all over the place having kids and dads, right? So we want to give you that direct channel. We also want to empower candidates to have a voice. If you read a spec and you don't apply, okay, cool. And you might get a job anyway. You might hire someone for that role. But is it interesting to you as an organization to understand, if it's women that you want to attract, why women are looking at the specs, how many, and then they don't apply, and what's the reason? Give you some sentiment capture, because that candidate wastage is what we want to provide and empower organizations to provide the right strategy for engagement. There is no shortage of tools that are declaring themselves as diversity inclusion minded. For instance, Textio is a great gender decoding piece of software, right? But is that what you need? Is it your job specs that are the problem, or is it your brand, or is it your recruitment process, or is it your interviewers? What is it? And so rather than us saying we've got all the answers, we want you to be data led. So our platform is engagement in that way, and we also want to the proposition is to enable the candidate to have the voice and the strength to do this, and it's all through anonymization. So a big thing that we're doing here is that all the CVs that we effectively want to be an applicant processor for you. So we process applications in a certain way for you, and then the output is you get redacted profiles. And so all your CVs that you get, you won't ever see anybody's name, email, telephone number, nothing about their age, nothing about their ethnicity, nothing about their sexual orientation, nothing about their university for social mobility reasons, etc. All these things are excluded, and all you get is the information that's really relevant for you to make a decision as to whether this person is right for my job or not. And then we pair that with traits, values, on that kind of thing, plus key skills summaries self-declared by the candidate, as well as all the information, so that when I looked at this as a recruiter, I'm going, actually, I've got everything I need to make a decision on the short list. So that's what we want to do, because that's where things happen. There's a stat, Mario, that's 7 seconds. That's what a recruiter takes to look at a CV.
Yeah, I've read something along those lines. I mean, even if we don't think about those, if you just think about an interview, it's a very short amount of time to quote unquote sell yourself to a company and prove.
Right,
and you have that small window to prove that you're the right person for the job. It's really rough sometimes. But actually, picking up on what you were describing, it seems to be very data-driven, the product that candidate X will deliver. So talking about that, what were the technologies involved in the creation of this product? Can you talk about those?
Yeah, we're pre-launch, as I mentioned to you guys previously.
Right.
So we are, more. What's interesting, when I was talking to when we first got engaged, and I was looking at what your principles are. I'm not a technical individual, like I'm a recruiter, right? But I'm very design-led. Because I feel the engagement or the experiences that candidates have at this stage in time aren't very. If you look at something like JobServe, and please don't sue me if you're JobServe, that hasn't changed or innovated in the time that I've been in recruitment. If I go on there now, I know exactly. I could probably describe to you, with my eyes closed, exactly what that UI looks like, and it's terrible. There are so many of these sites that commoditize and make you as a candidate feel like cattle, and we wanted to be design-led, where we're actually trying to engage in a different way. So. It was less about the architecture and your traditional elements of we're led by a technology partner that tells you actually the best way to code this is in, let's say, React or whatever, and we want to go through this or this architecture, and we use AWS. And I'm sure there are much of a muchness. I can't really tell you the difference between Azure and AWS. Whether it's more relevant for me at this stage. But what I do know is I need to put a button here. I need to change this element here. I need this bit of the workflow to view a job spec here, because those are the small, subtle differences that make a difference to a candidate. Augmenting something that's already in existence and making it better, more efficient, more refined, less complicated is the thing that I think can win over engagement, is where we've led from.
Okay. What were the major challenges involved in the creation of this business model?
It's all hypothetical.
Especially during COVID, during this year, right?
Yeah, we came out of the shadows in February, and then COVID hit in March 22nd. And I'm sitting there going, oh, right, so I can't leave my house now. So that's good. That's exactly what you need when you want to get a message out. But actually, COVID is horrible. Don't get me wrong, but it's been a blessing in disguise to give us some time. And not to jump ahead, I don't know if it's a question you're going to end up asking, but it meant that I could explore things and understand and learn things as I've always wanted to do, and now I have the time to do it. I familiarized myself with a lot of the Adobe products. XD became my best friend to just understand wireframes and look at all that sort of stuff, and look at it from an applicant and look at it from a client side. So it was a challenge because you have to learn these things, but that's what the internet's so good for, right? There's so many things I didn't know how to do, but YouTube. You have to sift through the rubbish, but you can get to it.
Right. You have to search for whatever you're looking for.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, but there are some. Look, the problem becomes this: what I want to create and what we feel as a team that the industry needs, the challenge becomes how do you test it, and the challenge becomes when you talk to a technology provider, they're going, "Hey, man, that's not true. You can't actually do that." This is utopia. So there's been some of those discussions, but in the main, like companies like yourself, you are a low code led. There are some no code led propositions. I haven't investigated those well enough to really sort of get into a discussion about that, but that's where we're leading towards, where technology needs to be accessible, needs to be understood, and needs to be democratized as much as possible, so that people, kids, I want my kids that want to some time to be exploring these things and go, hey, Dad, look at this. What did Zuckerberg create? He created this thing for his dad, who was a dentist, didn't he? So that you could do an intercom within the house, etc. And he did that when he was like 8 or something. That's the beauty of technology, is that opportunity and exploration. So challenging, but we're not fazed by it. I think the most biggest challenge is choosing what to use and which partners to engage with. And that's the problem. You can market yourself in all these different ways, but how do you know whether they're the right people? That becomes the difficulty, I think, more than anything else.
Have you been doing any upskilling in low code by any chance?
I would not say no, obviously not, because I love the kind of potential and the journeys that has, you know, creating power apps with minimal fuss, you know, it's good. Absolutely. I'm excited by the potential to see what we can do on that sense. You know, that's why when we first engaged, I was like, tell me a little bit more about how this works and, you know, with the structure and stuff like that, because I'm fascinated by it. I think that's good. You know, when I started in recruitment, it was like, okay, we just bought this system. We need to lift the bonnet up, and you need to hire people that can dissect every little element of it and then piece it back together in a new way in this transition period to what we actually wanted to do. That sounds like a lot of work. And, you know, these banks were paying people 600 upwards a day, you know, when the market was good, you know, and then later on you find out the system's crashed and it doesn't work, you know, these things. So things that are a bit easier, is always a good route to consider for sure.
I think we're going to have to wrap up, Mario, aren't we?
We're running out of time.
Sorry, I waffled.
So no, it was great. Thank you very much. So with that, unfortunately, we do reach the end of our time. Thank you very much, Man and Rebecca, for being able to join us and participate in our podcast.
Anytime.
See you soon.